you very much, Veit, for the kind introduction. And I will first start by sharing my window and my presentation. And I'm hoping that you can see it now. But yes, you are right. There are challenges with pediatric images. There are also some ways to work around that. And this is something that I would like to share with you in my presentation today. I would also like to thank the organizers of the MRI Together workshop for the invitation, and the European Society for Magnetic Resonance in Medicine and Biology for organizing this. And first, starting with my disclosures. And as I think Veit's introduction already mentioned, children are special. And what I would like to leave you with at the end of my short presentation today is that it's really important to take care of kids, because this is not just going to help them develop well and healthy, but it's going to improve the quality of life of adults as well. Because what happens during the childhood, if it's not well addressed, it's going to impact the rest of the lifespan. And here I just want to show you in some high-level examples that children have different diseases also than adults. And yes, pediatric diseases are often rare, with some exceptions. Viral infections are common among kids. But if you look at this, the percentage of deaths by age in this graph I'm sharing here, you actually see that during the neonatal period, there are a lot of non-communicable diseases that kill children. During infancy, toddler period, diarrhea is a major factor that kills children. This is not the case, as we know, so often with adults, where cancers, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, neurological problems become a lot more prominent. These common conditions in adulthood are often rare during childhood. Therefore, this makes often severe pediatric diseases rare diseases. And because pediatric diseases are rare diseases, I like to insist a little bit on that term. The definition of a rare disease is that it has less than 200,000 people affected by a disease. But put together rare diseases, and it adds up to about 350 million. This is enough to the world's third most populous country in the world. Now, children with rare diseases, 1 in 3 kids affected by one of these conditions dies before it turns 5-year-old. And then if you look back at rare diseases, about 80% of them have a genetic basis. Therefore, this is really important to understand rare diseases for understanding also human biology. So in a nutshell, some of the challenges that I see for AI in pediatric healthcare start with data, access to data, because conditions are rare, because data are not acquired in the same way for kids, not as often as it is done for adults, because different institutions that work in isolation set different protocols, get few cases with different protocols, put them into an AI algorithm, and that's the recipe for a very unstable result. And also, kids are growing, and they are growing fast early in their life. So development is important in this stage of life, which is different again than adults. There is no funding often for adults, and there is no big philosophy behind it. But if we look at where the sources of money come from, they come from people who have access to funds. Later in life, there is much more access to funding, right? Young parents are not as wealthy as sometimes some of the politicians who decide where funds go. So we see a lot more funding being put into diseases of older age than of younger age. And then there is a general level of inequity in healthcare, which impacts children probably even more. And that's access to elite healthcare systems, and such as this pediatric ward where I'm showing you a picture here. This is in Uganda, a photo taken by one of my colleagues. So because I was speaking about genetics and inequity, this is a map of access to genetic resources in the world. So if you are in North America, where I am in Washington, DC, parts of South America, most of Europe, some small parts of Asia, Oceania, you're in good hands. But if you are a child and an adult living in other parts of the world, access to genetic resources is very, very scarce. And in particular, I think if we look at certain regions in Africa, in Southeast Asia, there are countries where it is definitely zero access to such specialized care. This specialized care is important for identifying rare diseases and diseases of genetic basis early, because preventive care early in life is what saves lives and what improves the quality of life. And even in the United States, I just want to give you an example. For a child born in the 60s with Down syndrome, the child would be expected to live only a few years. Now, if you're born with Down syndrome, you're expected to have a full adult and productive life if you have the same condition. So if you are born in an area without access to this specialized care, where pediatricians and neonatologists are not trained to identify genetic conditions, and if that condition is subtle and has subtle dysmorphia, identifying it looks pretty much like in this cartoon. So I want to also give you, after telling you about challenges, I will also give you 3 examples of how we work around some of these challenges. First, this is not MRI, but these are pictures of newborns from different backgrounds, some of them with genetic conditions that are obvious, some with genetic conditions that are subtle and escaped their doctors, and some that are just normative. So the diversity in this case, there is a diversity of patients because we all look different. There is the genotype that determines whether there is a genetic conditions or not, but there's also the phenotype, which is influenced by the ethnicity, the race, the geographic location of the child. So by to be able to bring resources to children everywhere, what we work with is AI and image analysis. So we design an algorithm that does deep phenotyping of the face. Like, this is my niece, the first picture when she was a baby. This is another girl from Uganda with an obvious Down syndrome. These are 2 boys born on the same day in the same clinic in the UAE, and both of them were about to be discharged. One of them is syndromic and one of them is not. So identifying these kids early is really critical, taking into account all the diversity that exists in the population, because preventive care at this early age has a tremendous impact in the rest of the lives of these kids. Also, here I'm showing you some images that we published just a couple of months ago with the paper of Antonio Porras in the Lancet Digital Health, where we looked also at phenotyping the development of the face. Again, kids develop, they grow. And here I'm showing you what is considered a healthy, normal face. Both boys and girls of different races and ethnicities at different ages. In contrast, if we look at children with Williams-Barré syndrome, just as an example, we see that we can actually quantify the phenotypical differences between children of these categories, which is really important also to teach local doctors how to look for to identify a condition early. And with our colleagues from the National Institutes of Health, we did a number of studies looking at prominent syndromic conditions in diverse populations. If you're interested in this, we have a number of studies, but also there's a story that I like to recommend because I really enjoyed it in The Economist. If you want to learn about what machines can tell from your face, we were covered in this as well, but it's not just about medicine. It's about the society in general. And I'm just showing you here as an example. Because I was talking about giving access and providing help at the point of care, we have also an app that allows clinicians to collect data where the child is based. And the top pictures here show our colleagues in neonatology in Sharjah. At the bottom, we see our colleagues with the phones in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So this was one of the examples on the diversity, I think, of people. But because we are at an MRI workshop, I'm going to mention something with MRI as well. And in this case, I'm referring to data diversity in the MRI sense. So Veit was mentioning earlier that there are very few cases, right, for some of these conditions. So a hospital of ours, although we have a very, very large patient population, when you look at a child with a rare condition, we have very few cases. So we acquire, let's say, the MRI of a brain of a child with a low-grade glioma. This is what I'm going to exemplify with in Washington, D.C. But to get more cases and to be able to develop algorithms, we work with our colleagues from Philadelphia, our colleagues from Denver, where they use different protocols. And now we have to put together an algorithm that works with all this diversity of data, few cases from each location and work well. So this is a conundrum in AI. So what I want to show you, I think people here know very well how diversity and MRI looks like, but just very briefly to go through this, our three institutions use three different scanners. Each one of these has a proprietary reconstruction algorithm. I hope you see on the screen without problems that these three images do look different, even if they are brain of a child of the same age. The field of view in the images is different. The voxel size is different. But most importantly for our algorithms, I think if we look at how the white matter and gray matter look like, and I'm showing you here two locations, same spot in the brain, we see very, very different values. So these are, of course, factors that confuse deep learning networks trained with very little data. So what we do, this is the work of Carlos Torres, we create a shared latent space from the protocols that we bring together. I'm showing you here three protocols. It can be any number of them. And we use that as data harmonization. Then we can recreate any of the protocols that is preferable or we think it's best. So now all images from all locations look the same. But more importantly, we connect here a reconstruction of the image directly into the shared latent space with the help of the segmentation that we're looking for. Here I'm showing you the anterior visual pathway. So the segmentation is directly connected with an adversarial network and the reconstruction done through in the network. So this everything here is connected. So therefore, this data harmonization here, we reconstruct a protocol that is optimized for the segmentation for no other reason. And again, to show you how this looks, these are the three protocols, three cases. We recreate them in the protocol of the other sites so that they all look the same. For if a clinician that is used to one protocol wants to read all the others, they can look at them in the same way. But then again, more importantly, we get a segmentation that is as accurate as that of a specialist. And here I'm showing you the anterior visual pathway with optic pathway gliomas. That's what's shown in green. And why this is really difficult is because I think you can judge from the shape of the structures. It has the optic nerves, the chiasm, and the tracts. These are elongated, they are thin and small. That's right, the nightmare of any segmentation. And also I want to go briefly to another thing, again, specific to kids, is knowledge building in general, right? When we have limited data. We did last year, and I think we published it earlier this year, a study looking at a review of how kids are impacted by COVID-19, and we were looking at the lungs of these kids. So we found out at the time that fewer than 2% of the publications were focused on children. And now in the United States, 17% of all infections are kids. Last week, 22% of the new cases were children, likely because children are behind on vaccination. So this is, again, a level of inequity about what is spent on resources for research and for a new disease, and what is the reality. And as I think we all know, at the beginning, the society even believed that kids are not impacted by COVID-19. That is absolutely false. So we're looking at how can we accelerate knowledge and to create something new about COVID-19. And I'm not the only one who's done this. And for that, there were, I think, 4 fundamental pillars that were necessary. One of them is data, fast access to data. The second one is to resources, such as resources in AI, domain experts, in this case, radiologists, pulmonologists, epidemiologists, and then to do all of this in a timely manner. So a year ago, we organized the COVID-19 20 lung CT vision segmentation. You see here the link to the challenge. The challenge is reopened right now. All the data, the resources are free there, and anybody can use them. We wanted to do this very fast because we had data from the NIH, we had computational resources from NVIDIA, specialists from Children's National, and the support of the MICI Society. All look great. You can find a paper there with all the details of this. This is not what I'm focusing on. What I want you to show is that once again, we looked at only adult data because that was the only thing we have access to. We didn't look at kids. Kids are impacted differently. by some of the syndromes that are affecting them after infection with COVID-19. So at the next step, and then now again in collaboration with NVIDIA, the Massachusetts General Hospital, and Brigham and Women's Hospital, we got together a group of 20 sites from around the world, all of them clinical sites. You see them here on a map. They're in 8 countries. We all provided chest x-rays. We provided EMR data, such as blood tests, respiratory data, medication, and so on. And we had a deep learning network that was predicting if a patient with a chest x-ray needed oxygen supplements 24 or 72 hours after. Here we use the concept of federated learning, which again, I'm thinking that our audience is familiar with. You take the model to the data, not the data to the model. We want to do this fast. We didn't want to wait for paperwork to share data between the sites. So everything was trained locally. Nobody shared their data. We trained a global model somewhere in the middle. So this allowed us to accelerate, again, some of the knowledge we are creating. We had more than 16,000 patients in this study. This study was just published in Nature Medicine, and Itai Dayan is the main author on it. But if you look at the distribution of data here, we see again, there was only one site that had pediatric data. That was our hospital. Everyone else was adult. So once again, access to pediatric data was not adequate in this. However, there was some good news as well. The federated model improved the performance on average by 16% over what was happening in a non-federated way. For kids, the improvement was of 25%. Because we had such few cases, this kind of level of transfer learning from adult to kids worked really well in this case. Again, much more data, but also this is a condition where children and adults do share characteristics of the disease. They have differences too, but they do share characteristics too. So again, if I showed you an example of how we want to create digital technology to go to the point of care where there are no resources, then another example of how we have to work with very limited data from multiple sources and create algorithms that work with that. This is a third opportunity to improve pediatric healthcare with transfer learning from adult data when that's possible. So to summarize, I hope you believe, like I do, that the greatest value of investing in healthcare is early in life. When kids are healthy, it costs little, but this impacts the entire duration of the lifespan. Later in life, when acute and chronic diseases become present, everything is very costly with little outcome. There's little you can save with a lot of money, while here you can do everything. So pediatric healthcare is really, really important. And I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and also to thank all the organizations that are funding and supporting and collaborating in the projects that I showed you, and which are shown here at the bottom.
Thank you very much. A fascinating talk. I mean, we see it happening right now with the Omicron wave in Southern Africa, how little we know about the disease in children. It's everything what you mentioned, the resource scarcity and everything comes together. I would first ask if anybody from the audience has any questions about this. While people are thinking about this, I have just a technical question. The adaptation network that you did to adapt the MRI characteristics between the sites, how did you do it? Was it kind of an adversarial component of an autoencoder also for the images, or how did that work?
Exactly, and that had a cycle consistency. Right, to get really technical about it. Right, absolutely. So it was a development on that direction. And I was saying what we're inputting is the segmentation in as well to be one of the determinants of how to harmonize the data.
I mean, that would be useful for anything. Basically, everybody has this problem that, one CT scanner looks a little bit different compared to the other CT scanner and whatnot. I mean, that would be like for any multi-center study, this would be interesting, like a harmonization, data harmonization module, so to say. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an area in which we, whether we like it or not, we had to really focus on, because I was showing you this example with 3 hospitals that provide data together. We work with about 25, and some of them really have very few cases that are put together. So just as simply as that, you know, the analysis of those images does not work the way it is. So we had to think of a way to bring everything together.
Yeah, you can increase your effective N number because you need a certain amount of each type of scanner, and so you only need one type. You can pool these studies. Super, cool. Any other questions? Maybe Davis, my co-moderator, is online. Davis, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I was actually very interested in that same topic. Looking over the paper, the architecture was really interesting. So could you talk a little bit more about how, because the segmentations that it produced, that part was all done in like a supervised manner, correct? And then the homogenation was done in an unsupervised manner?
Yes.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about how that sort of architecture works, where you have like a combination of both supervision and unsupervised learning?
Right. So basically, at a very high level, right, the unsupervised homogenization, I think it's in a more common way. You have the encoder, and then there was a GAN, right, at the end, that was pulling things out, and a discriminator to create your other protocols and so on. So when we had a segmentation there, we basically, you know, I think of it of, right, the channel that fits into that as well. But it was, I think I was basically showing there very briefly that the loss function of the segmentation was a combination by using the adversarial loss function and the variational autoencoder. I don't know, but you know, I'm doing this by doing puppetry also with my hands, and I don't know if it's clear enough, but I'd be happy to send you more information about that as well, and to show. Actually, I did not show in these slides how the full architecture of this looks like. It was just at a very simple level.
Of course, in a very short talk, but it's a very interesting architecture, and I think I definitely encourage the participants to look up the paper and take a closer look at the methods.